As I have watched my wife for 18 plus years fulfill the role of mom, and of course my own mother, who's given me enough wisdom to survive 30, well, let's see, I'll be 38 here in a couple weeks, I guess. I have realized that being a mom is probably one of the most difficult jobs there is. And as I've thought about it, I believe that the reason, that probably the biggest reason, is because it never stops. There's no end, there's no time off, there's no break room, there's no nothing. It's just like in the video with the little fingers under the door, you know. In fact, I had this saying years ago when the kids were little, you know, that they don't really do this anymore because they're too big. But when they were 3, you know, you go into the bathroom and they try to follow you in there. You know, it's like you can't even go to the bathroom in peace. And when they're little, and so it can be a challenge. And then of course it just gets worse as they get older. So, but that's all right. You know, it's a lifelong thing, and the value that moms have, there is a equally limitless bound to that. And frankly, one of the reasons why our nation has struggled so much socially and morally is because of the lack of good parenting, the lack of moms that love their kids, teach their kids, discipline their kids, and they're willing to put in the time that it takes to step up to that task. And I certainly appreciate the moms that are listening today that are willing to do that. Well, we are in Ecclesiastes. We are moving on to chapter 7, and there is a big change now, a paradigm shift in this wisdom literature, where our infamous king, who has started out our saying with basically everything's worthless and in vain and such, and so we've kind of moved through 6 chapters of that, basically examining that, all the vanities, all the things in life that are useless, and he kind of sees through all the transparencies to get to the solid things, and we examine the conclusion that finally, ultimately, loving God, loving the people in our lives, serving God faithfully, ultimately, and just enjoying what we have, whether it's much or little, is really the essence of life. That's really one of the foundational building blocks to experiencing life, is to not get caught up in all the details, to not get caught up in all the problems, because there will be problems every day. I cannot think of a day in my life, maybe there's been one day, I don't even know that there has been, where there hasn't been some problem facing me personally. And so we know that there will always be trouble. And if we wake up and we are expecting the day to go perfectly, and we're expecting everything to go well, then we are absolutely going to be disappointed with that. And so the goal that Solomon has been, I think, leading us to, he's not one to really come out and say it. You know, he puts the wisdom out there, and we have to draw our own conclusion. And that's probably a good thing, because we have a hard time receiving knowledge when it's just given to us. You know, I mean, think about school, for example, whether it's high school, college, elementary. We have such wonderful teachers most of the time that give us great knowledge. And what do? We go to sleep, we doodle on our phone, we do other things. We have such a wonderful opportunity to learn, and sometimes we have to figure it out. That's almost a little bit of an incitement to move forward and to try to figure it out, and that's how Solomon is. And so as we take this shift away from that and we begin to look at this next section, which is entitled Wise Sayings, okay? And sayings are, you know, we're pretty familiar with sayings. It's not as foreign to us. You know, there's all kinds of old-fashioned sayings. You know, a bird in hand is worth 2 in the bush. Takes one to know one. You know, there's all kinds of sayings. So that's a little more friendly for us and not quite as foreign. And so I think we get a little bit of a deep breath to kind of pause and not have to dig so deep and to ponder and to sit out in the quiet and try to, you know, really grasp what is being taught to us. And now we get to more of some of the practical applications where he spells out really what some of these kind of deeper meanings look like in life. And of course, it's some of the things when we have to to translate them into our own time, it can be a little bit of a challenge. Because we didn't live several thousand years ago. We live right now, here today, May 8th, 2016, I think it is. And so we have to begin to take some of these things that we may not deal with on a day-to-day basis and draw a parallel to them. And that's what we should do with all great literature. How many people in this room have endured an English class? Would you raise your hand? Okay, hopefully that's just about everyone, whether you were homeschooled or public schooled or private schooled or whatever, you have experienced English class. And one of the important things that hopefully you have learned in English class is that there is a deeper meaning in the literature that we read. Sometimes it's junk. Sometimes it's really good literature, just depending on what it is. And we are to draw out from that the meaning, all right, the reason why that literature is there. And particularly in Ecclesiastes, we have that same task, that same challenge to do that. And so let's begin going through here, through chapter 7. We'll see how far we get. We don't want to skip over anything because there's a lot of great sayings here. And some of these things are probably things that you've heard from your mother as she has attempted to raise you to be wise and shrewd. Beginning in verse 1. A good name is better than fine perfume, and the day of one's death than the day of one's birth. Okay, so we start off a little cryptic, not surprised. That's kind of how Ecclesiastes it rolls. So that's all right. So let's examine this. A good name. What does it mean to have a good name? All right, so it's not really talking about, if your name is David or Paul or Sam or Will or whatever, that I'm not sure that one name necessarily in the proper noun sense is better than another. But it's talking about the reputation of that name. When somebody mentions Shannon or Elijah or Ashley or Jamie, the question is what kind of a name do they bring? Do they bring a name of integrity, of someone who's a hard worker, of someone who's honest, or does it bring a name of somebody who is lacking all of those things? And it's saying that a good name, in other words, the way that we live, the way that people, and it's not necessarily their perception of us, because they may or may not have the right perception, but it's who we really are ultimately. It is better than fine perfume. All right, now perfume, if you, and I'm not a perfume expert, but what I know about it is that basically perfume has a base and a scent. And a more expensive perfume or cologne has a richer, more concentrated amount of that perfume or that scent in it. And so that's why, you can go to the store and you can pay $5 for perfume or cologne, or you can pay, I've seen some that are $100, $200, $300. I've never really bought any of those, but the difference is usually that the more expensive ones are more refined and they're more concentrated. So maybe one spray of it might equal 4 or 5 sprays of the cheaper stuff, and that's not always the case, but that's generally how that works. And that's why if you buy cleaners in concentrate or orange juice in concentrate, usually a more concentrated product will cost more. It's of more value. And that's what Solomon is saying, that a good name is more valuable than even the most refined product, the most refined perfume. And then he goes on in the same saying, and you'll notice if you're a reader or a student of Proverbs, you'll notice some similarities between Ecclesiastes and between Proverbs, that some of these sayings, sometimes they are analogies, sometimes they are unrelated, sometimes they're opposites, sometimes they're synonyms. We get a variety of things, and I am not one who has studied the poetry and prose of wisdom literature, but some of you who are more English, who have had more English classes than I have, can probably even point out, why the literature reads the way that it does. I am not quite as, I will try to point out the things that I know, but some of you probably are even better at that. You know that when you get to the 7th line or the 9th line that, this goes with this, and this is why this rhymes here and why this doesn't rhyme here. And I certainly am not quite up on that, but we will do our best as we go through this to draw out the meaning, which is ultimately our goal. the day of one's death better than the day of one's birth. In other words, when we die, we have lived a life and we leave a legacy. All right, we leave a name, all right, which we see in that very first few words. And that name has either earned us something great or it has earned us something that is to be ashamed of, or we've lived a life that was of little value. But regardless of that, whether it was great or little, one thing that is for certain is that there has been wisdom, there has been experience that has occurred, and so there is a greater value in that. In other words, living life, gaining wisdom is of greater value than of being ignorant or of not having experienced that. Verse 2, it is better to go to a house of mourning than to a house of feasting. All right? And that's because when we are in mourning, when we're struggling with a loss or we're discouraged or something devastating has happened in our life, it is a character building moment. It is a character building time. And even though it is painful for us and we don't like that, we are often, if not always, better because of that. That we are able to endure hardship, we're able to handle a large amount of stress, a large amount of problems without cracking, without breaking down and falling apart and not being able to function properly. And so even though I would probably say I would much rather be feasting, or in other words, celebrating, all right, that's what they're talking about, I'm not talking about eating necessarily, but just, celebrating, partying, living the good life, which, for me that's sitting in a rocking chair with lots of quiet and peace and with a gentle breeze flowing. For some of you, that's loud music and, stuff. And so whatever that is for you, it doesn't have to be, the stereotype of what we might think of as partying. But whatever brings joy to you, where you're not really being intellectually challenged, where you're not really your character is being sharpened, that time of hardship is greater. It is of more value. And so already we see a theme that is interwoven here, and that is the theme of value. That there are things in life that are of greater value, and there are things that are of little value. Right? Just like when in eating, we could have David House come up here and talk all about refined sugar and saturated fats and polyunsaturated fats, and in the bodybuilding world they talk about empty calories a lot, which is kind of a misnomer because no calories are truly empty. But some calories are more profitable than other calories. The good types of fat, proteins, complex carbohydrates, those are the nutrients of high value, and then the refined sugars and all the other empty calories that don't really do anything to help your overall health, those are lesser. And so we see that not everything is the same, that not every experience is the same. And this is kind of a big fly in the face to a lot of Eastern type belief systems, where there's kind of this universalist, everything has value, everybody, everything you do is really not good or bad, or it's not really, better or worse, that it's just kind of this grandiose cosmic free-for-all, when the truth is that there are things that are good and there are things that are evil. There are things that have value and things that don't have value. Verse 3, grief is better than laughter, for when a face is sad, a heart may be glad. And the heart of the wise is in a house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in a house of pleasure. And so we see a very direct attack on pleasure, all right? And this is where a lot of people kind of think God is like the great cosmic killjoy. He's the great cosmic, you can't do this, you can't do that, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. and oftentimes as Christians, we can become more about what we're against rather than what we're for. And that can be a very fine line, because certainly we are against some things, but ultimately we are for truth. We are for Christ. We are for righteousness, goodness in the world. We are for those things more than we are against other things. And so this is not a condemnation that everything that brings pleasure is bad, all right? But it is a condemnation of the pursuit of that as a means to an end. In other words, if we just wake up and we're just looking for the next fix, we're looking for the next thing that's going to make us happy, that's going to be fun, that's going to be easy, that life ultimately will end in emptiness. And I can absolutely attest to that. There's been times in my life where I just didn't care about my 5-year plan or about anything past tomorrow, and I just wanted to do what felt good. I wanted to do what seemed good to me at the time, and ultimately that ended in emptiness. And Solomon, in his wisdom, who admittedly, remember, this is the guy, if you weren't here that week, or if you haven't read the first few chapters, this is the guy that said, I pursued every pleasure. Okay? And there's a lot of wicked pleasures out there, okay? And he's saying, I pursued them all, and ultimately it was meaningless. And so it is probably where the rubber meets the road for us as Christians, where many people walk away and say, you know, I don't care, I don't mind to go to church, and I really don't mind to read the Bible, I really don't mind to, you know, put a bumper sticker on my car, but if you're going to say that all of a sudden I can't just do whatever I want and pursue whatever pleasure I want, that's probably where I'm going to just take a step back and say no thanks. And that's where the church has struggled a lot, because churches can often become about the 3 B's, bills, bucks, and let's see, I don't know if I can say butts or not. I don't know if that's politically correct or to say, but you know, basically money, people, and butts. I don't know. Bills, yeah, thank you, yeah. Whatever those 3 B's. There's also 3 B's in the survival world: bullets, band-aids, and beans. So I get all the B's. I don't know why there's so many B's. I don't know what the deal is with that, but there's a lot of B's. So I get those all confused. But we can often become people pleasers, and because we know that is a place where oftentimes people just aren't willing to pay that price, they're not willing to pay the cost to follow Christ, then it can be a situation where they walk away. And I believe that we need to be honest and up front and not try to sugarcoat that, not try to make it an easy way to belief, that we just need to be honest, that this is what it is. This is the cost. There is a cost for goodness. And often that cost, which we see earlier on in this chapter, is mourning, is hardship, is difficulty. Right now I'm at probably my wit's end as a person who's in their midlife. They have many children to parent. We've got farming thing going. We're trying to build a house. We've got a church plant that we're trying to lead and be a part of and reach our neighbors and people in our life for the Lord. And there are days where I am just at my wit's end. I just think I cannot possibly do or add one more thing. And I know I am not unique in that probably all of us are in the same boat to some extent, that we have gotten ourselves into situations where we just seemed to be completely overwhelmed. But yet, we thrive. We are forced to use our fullest potential when we're in those times of great trial and of great testing, and that perhaps the best of us comes out in that, even in that hardship. And that is where I think almost the contradiction is, that we seem to want pleasure, but ultimately at our best it is through hardship. It is better to listen to rebuke from a wise person than to listen to the song of fools. For like the crackling of burning thorns under the pot, so is the laughter of the fool. Now, this is a really rich section, and I want to take just a couple moments to really draw this out. First of all, if you're not sure what a rebuke is, that's okay. That's kind of a religious word. And a rebuke is where you basically go to someone in love and say, you know what you're doing is wrong. You should stop doing that. Now, no one really likes to receive a rebuke. We all seem to be fairly quick to give one, but nobody really is just, it's very hard to be like, oh, thanks. I'm so glad you pointed that out to me. I will quit doing that immediately. I mean, that often is not the response. Okay, that would be great. And there are people who are not in this church anymore because they received a rebuke in love and they didn't like to hear that, and so they, went somewhere else. But again, that's the cost of following Christ. If we're going to just compromise everything that we believe as Christians, we can't really say we're Christians because we've just compromised everything. But it's tough because oftentimes we give rebuke out of anger, out of meanness, and I certainly have been guilty of that many times where I thought I was being helpful and I was mean-spirited or too hard on someone, or approached someone at a time in their life where they weren't ready to hear that and hurt them, and I regret that. But that is ultimately the struggle, is to give a rebuke properly. But here it says it is better to receive a rebuke from a wise person than to listen to the song of fools. Now, so that begs the question, well, what is the song of fools? Well, the song of fools is just, hey, don't worry about it. It's all good. It's no big deal. Everybody makes that mistake. Everybody does that. It's okay. It'll be all right. Don't worry about it. That attitude, that's the song of fools. Song of fools. Yeah, just borrow another $50,000 for that car. It'll be okay. You'll get a promotion at some point, and so don't worry about it. Or yeah, it's been a bad day. Let's hit the bar. Let's get drunk. Let's get wasted, and we'll worry about the problems tomorrow. And that song of fools ultimately is what gets us into trouble, because we would rather, it is more pleasurable to listen to that song than it is to listen to the rebuke of the wise person saying, you really should save your money. You really shouldn't. You shouldn't borrow money for that. Or saying, you really shouldn't hit the bar. You should get counseling. You should talk to a friend. You should deal with this in a different way. Is that wise rebuke that says, you really need to get off this path. It's going to cause you distress in the future. And then he comes to this, and he gives us a kind of a word picture here, and he says that it's like the crackling of burning thorns under the pot. Now, I had never experienced the crackling of thorns until recently. Now we have locust thorns out at where we live, and they're probably, a good 2 inches long. I mean, you take one of those through the foot, and it's a bad day. It's only happened to me once, and that's where I went from buying a $40 pair of boots to a $100 pair of boots, because that is the difference. Is that sole will stop the thorn, and I took a good 1 3/4 inch one up the foot a couple years ago, and I learned my lesson. But they are vicious, and what's interesting about them is that they're hard on the outside and they're really sharp, but inside they have like air and water, and it's kind of like popcorn. When you throw them in a fire and you burn them, they crackle and they pop. It's this kind of a strange thing, and I remember I don't know, last fall I think was the first time I really noticed it, and we had cut down a bunch of locust trees and brush and stuff, and we'd thrown them in, we were burning all that stuff, and it was just crackling like crazy and popping, and there was stuff shooting everywhere. It's like, what in the world? And I figured out that it was those thorns, that they were because of the pressure inside. I guess the pressure built up either because of the water or the air that was in there, and it just exploded out. And so he uses, so as I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking, okay, it's better to listen to a wise person than a fool, because the song of fools is like the crackling of burning thorns under the pot, and so is the laughter of the fool. And in other words, it's the death of the thorn. All right. In other words, it's like the kind of the last song. It's like, hey, he's laughing, and then he's going to be crying later. And as I've thought about that, it is really a fantastic word picture, because that is what happens when we take foolish words in and we act on them. It is the last thing that happens before the end. And of course, then he points out his favorite word. This too is futile. Surely the practice of extortion turns a wise person into a fool, and a bribe destroys the mind. Now, when I think about this verse, and as I was kind of praying and thinking about an analogy in our culture, what I see, and whether you're real political or not, I know some of us are more political than others. I'm probably semi-political. Some people would say, oh man, he's really political. People that aren't very political. And then people that are like really political that show up at all the rallies and all the stuff, they would be like, he is not political. I get emails all the time. I need to be at this rally. I need to be at this event, kind of thing. And I'm like, yes, I probably do, but I don't have time to do that. So I'm somewhere there in the middle. But it has been my observation there is a lot of extortion and bribing going on in the way government works. And here's how I perceive that government works. This may be a little bit of an overstatement. But let's say that you're a company and you want a certain thing to happen for you, all right, for your product that you manufacture. You want a tax break, or you want something legalized so you can sell it. And so you have a lot of money and you hire a lobbyist, and you send this lobbyist to Washington or down to Jeff City, and you're paying them a salary basically to lobby to try to persuade the candidates to vote your way. All right. So then what happens? Well, you get certain candidates who seem to be friendly to that idea. They get campaign contributions. All right. Well, if you're running for an office and you get a large contribution from a company or an individual, you're going to feel a little obligated to vote their way, especially when you know you probably received that contribution, which has enabled you now to reach many more thousands of people. So you get elected and now you're in office, and all of a sudden you know this oil company or this pharmaceutical company knocks on your door and says, hey, you know, it would really be great if this certain bill were to pass, were to fail, you know, depending on how it was for this company. And, you know, it would be really important to us. We'd be very grateful, you know, if you would, you know, step in and do this. And what I see is what happens a lot of times is you got these big companies that are basically own politicians. And politicians vote the way they want. And so instead of having a free market economy, instead of having free elections, and again, I'm not trying to get all political and necessarily offer a solution, but I'm pointing out, I see this happen a lot on this, whether it's the state level, the federal level, and it's extortion, it's a bribe. You know, we're trying to buy people off to try to get them to do what is the most advantageous thing for us, either personally or for our business or for the organization that we work for. And so Solomon says that the practice of extortion, it turns a wise person into a fool. Right? Because I think a lot of these guys, these politicians that start out, you know, they're good people, good men or women. They want to make a difference. They want to stand up for the underdog, or they want to help our economy grow, or they want to help you know, whatever it is socially that they're looking to do. And they get kind of caught up in all this extortion and bribes, and pretty soon they're just a part of the system. They're just perpetuating the system. They're owned by the system. If you watch the middle three Star Wars, I guess it'd be episodes 1, 2, and 3, the ones that came out, I don't know, 15 years-ish ago. You know, that was the problem in the Senate. That was why the empire was so appealing and why there were so many problems, because there was just, you know, here's this world that's been taken over virtually by the Trade Federation, or blockaded, I guess, technically, and no ships can come in or out. The people are being subdued, and all that can happen in the big congressional meeting of the Republic is, oh, well, we'll send a committee to see to see if that's really happening, and, you know, come up with a solution. You know, it's just like we're going nowhere. We're accomplishing nothing. It's just bogged down. And that's probably a good analogy for a lot of way that things go. And that's how a wise person then turns into a fool. And then of course, followed by the more severe statement, a bribe destroys the mind. In other words, instead of us setting out for the original goals that we had set upon to accomplish, that were good and noble, now we've been bribed, those things have been taken away, and we become more of a detriment to the people that we represent than a help. All right, we're almost out of time, so let's close with this next section, where he says, the end of a matter is better than its beginning, and a patient spirit is better than a proud spirit. So let's talk about those two briefly before we close, a patient spirit and a proud spirit. They are contradictory, because a proud spirit of one that thinks, I know everything, I don't need to consult anyone wise, or I don't need to plan or think about this because I already know what I'm doing, so I'm just going to go for it. I'm just going to do it. You know, we call that in a leaping without looking would be a saying we might apply to that. That we think we know everything, whether we do or not, and usually when we're prideful, we particularly don't know what we're doing, and we're just going for it. Where the patient spirit is one that says, you know, I need to think about this, I need to plan well, I need to prepare well, I need to wait for the right time. You know, that's probably the biggest struggle I have. Oftentimes I want to be a patient person, and I think to myself, okay, I'm not going to rush into anything, but then all of a sudden, whenever I'm faced with, I've done everything I can do, and now I have to wait for the right time, it's kind of like I need to manufacture the right time because I don't want to wait for the real right time. And so I'm not having a patient spirit. But yet a true patient spirit is one that says, I will wait for the right time. And if you remember, a couple weeks ago we looked at where there's a time to live, a time to die, those seasons of life. One of those themes that was very strong was that there is really a time and a season for everything. And where we go wrong as people in life, and we're living life, is we choose the wrong time, we choose the wrong season. Whether it's marriage, whether it's when we're purchasing something, in terms of debt, it seems like the season is always now. I want this thing, so I'm going to buy it now. And where if we would have just been patient and waited till the right time, or when we had the right amount of money saved up, then this purchase would have been a blessing rather than a curse. And so we'll wrap it up because we're out of time. But I hope as we examine this, and as you are taking time in your quiet time to consider this wisdom, ultimately we are listening to the songs of fools if we reject it, if we choose to walk in another direction. And it's tough. It is very hard that living the Christian life is not coming to church and getting excited during the worship time, or getting excited about missions, or whatever it is alone, because it is about those things, but it's not about those things alone. It's about what we choose to do when nobody's looking, when we're not with all of our church friends, when we're not in a time of prayer or Bible study. It's what we do as a result of that really makes the difference. That's how we really define who we are, and that's that when we're dead and when we're gone, the legacy that we leave behind, that is the thing that had true value. That's the fine perfume of life. If we live and die and we leave nothing to the world, then our life is truly meaningless. And that all the things that we work for and all the things that we strive for, they will come to nothing, because as we saw before, all the things you've ever owned, someone else is going to get. Your physical body is going to die and be put in the ground, and it's going to decay and go back to the dust from which it came. So the only thing that truly exists is our soul and the legacy that we leave behind, a legacy of either truth and wisdom, or the legacy of foolishness and arrogance. And so this week we will be faced with the decision, because you can't just abstain. All right, you can abstain from voting, but you can't abstain from living life. You're either going to choose good or evil. It is very difficult to ride the fence. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the wisdom that you have taught us. We thank you for the wisdom that, particularly on this Mother's Day, as we celebrate the impact that mothers have had on our life, we thank you for that. And even for those of us that perhaps didn't have a mother in our life, for those godly women or those wise women that came into our life and they offered us truth rather than a lie. And they offered us guidance. And we thank you for that, and we celebrate that. And I pray, Lord, today as we ponder on these things, that they can be hard. They can be boring. They can be seemingly, we can be indifferent towards them. I pray, Lord, that you would allow them to shape us, even if it brings hardship, even if it brings difficulty into our lives, that we would be made better, that blessing would come from that rather than curses and darkness. And I pray, Lord, for each one here, that if there is anyone who's deceived, who thinks that they are doing what's right when in fact they're not, I pray that you would free them from that slavery. And I pray that you would open their eyes, that we might see and know your will truly, and to know what is good, and to be able to choose good over evil. And we just thank you, Lord, for the time that we've had. We ask for your blessing as we go away from this place today. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you guys so much. Have a great and happy Mother's Day.